Mitch, can we get the lights? Lights around. Okay. Hi, guys. Are the mics okay? You want to test?
That's one. Yes.
Yeah,
I think we're fine.
Okay, cool. So we know that this is Riz and Amanda. Some of you may have read their piece. Some of you might not have just yet. But beyond Riz and Amanda, they have lives and they have stories. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves first?
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. Hi, everyone. Yeah, my name is Rizvan. This is my wife, Amanda. And we've been married for 5 years, almost 5 years now. Yeah, we also have a dog, Windy, which I believe Sharon talked about earlier. She's a very dear part of our lives. But yeah, been there for about 3 years now. Amanda and I have been in Faith Mission Home. Well, I've been in Faith Mission Home for most of my life. Amanda has been for maybe 10 years. And we're both serving in various ministries here. And that's also how we came to know Ryan when he joined us a couple of years ago. So yeah, that's us. And yeah.
How about Amanda? Amanda, do you want anything to add? No? Okay, all right. They'll hear your voice later. Okay. So we've got a couple of questions that we've prepared to ask them really about the experience in their piece. We're not going to get them to reread the piece to you. You guys can do that in your own time. And it's an interview, actually. So this is kind of resembling what their piece is like.
An interview of an interview.
This is interviewception. Interviewception, an interview within an interview. So the first question I have for you guys, and whoever wants to go, just go ahead first, is, what were your thoughts when I first approached you for the piece? And to give a bit of context, when I came to them, I asked them if they would be willing to write a piece about intimacy through differences. I know Riz and Amanda for a while, and I'll let them fill in the details there. But what was it like when I first approached you for the piece? What was going through your minds?
I knew Ryan was going to approach me at some point in time. And my first thought was no. I don't like writing. I'm not great at writing. So yeah, I knew Amanda would be much more comfortable writing. She had written before. But yeah, I was like, no, I can't write.
Okay, but in the end, so
there's a piece. You can flip to page 100 and something. It's there.
We did not write.
True.
Yeah, but I think my first reaction was like, right, like why us? We're not experts in any way. We didn't really think our experience was anything special. Yeah, so it's just why us? What do we have to say?
Fair enough. Good responses, fair responses. So to explain how the process kind of went, I approached them and I asked them to write a piece together. And the way the first draft kind of came in was Amanda had a series of reflections, and then Riz had a series of reflections, and we kind of tried to play them off of each other. But it didn't work. It did not work.
Because I do not write well.
No, it's like steak and chocolate. They just don't go together. Individually, they're fine. So we ended up changing our tact a bit, and we changed our approach. So we ended up settling for an interview. So if you read through the piece now, it's actually structured as an interview that I hosted with them. So, I went over to their place. Windy was barking in the background, and you can hear that in the original interview. But we sat down for about an hour, 2 hours, and I asked you guys a series of questions. And we dived deep into your personal lives, your marriage, your stories. What was that experience of the interview like for you guys?
The interview itself was very enjoyable, but it's because we knew you. It just felt like a conversation with a friend. I don't really think we thought it would end up like this. As if we would end up here talking about it to other people. Yeah. But it was just an enjoyable interview, and I think it was an experience that, at least for me, helped me put what happened into a narrative and sort of the closest word I can find is closure, but it wasn't really closure that we needed. We had already sort of resolved the issues there, right? But I think it was like a feeling of, I think, something that we learned, that we got through, and something to be proud of. Yeah, I think that's how the interview, as I reflect on it, what it gave me. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the closest word we could think of was closure, but I mean, we had already kind of closed that chapter of our lives and moved on from there. But as we wrote down the story, as we pinned it down into a clear narrative, I think it gave us clarity on what we and our partners felt about the whole incident at each stage of the incident. And now we kind of have this shared narrative that we both know what we're talking about. We both know what we went through, and we're both able to share that with others. I mean, being on the same pages.
A couple of pages. It's quite a long piece. There are many pages. Yeah, thanks for that, guys. So to explain a bit more of how the process kind of unfolded, so I was there at their place. We recorded an interview with Google or something, some phone app. We
What's the
recorded.
phone you broke with your
Sorry?
teeth?
That's a private story. We'll tell it another time, volume 3. But so we sat down, we recorded the interview, and we had maybe two hours. It was about 2 hours of information. And I'm a terrible transcriber, so I sent it over to one of our editorial team members. They've asked me not to say their name, but they listened to the piece and they wrote it down. And we had this huge chunk. It was very long, maybe 10,000 words. And then we had to kind of cut and cut and cut, and to kind of keep the true story of what was there and maybe remove some of the superfluous information that was important, but maybe couldn't fit into the volume. So what was the question? The next question I have for you guys is, we sat down, we talked, we had the audio recording, but then we finally put it to paper and we edited it down and it came across as this narrative. What was it like for you guys to see your story, the words that you had said, in that condensed and distilled form of the article that people can read? What was that like?
I mean, if the conversation with you, if the interview was a sense of us kind of getting that closure, being the best word we can find for it, then reading the piece at the end gave us this sense of achievement and pride, looking at where we were and how far we've come. I think in that condensed form, it's really, I mean, when you're going through it, when you're even going through the whole situation, it doesn't really strike you as how much has changed. But then when you read it in one piece in like maybe 10 minutes, then over the 10 minutes, you go through all these emotions and all these situations, especially when it evokes the emotions that we have been through, then that sense of achievement was really, I think, something that we experienced when we read the piece.
Amanda, any thoughts?
I think it was like reading somebody else's life, right? Knowing in my head that it happened to me, but in that sort of like third person form, I think it helped me gain a new sense of empathy for us. I don't know if it sounds strange, but sort of empathy for ourselves. And I think that's being kind to myself, to him, to ourselves was not something that came naturally or easily. So I think seeing that piece and reading through it from sort of like that distance, that third person view, it helped me gain a new sense of empathy for who we were, what we went through. And I think that's something valuable to sort of remember in future difficult situations, to be kind to ourselves also.
Yeah, that's really nice to hear. I mean, we actually haven't prepared or rehearsed any of these questions, so we really haven't. I have the questions here, not the answers. No, it looks like I have the answers, just questions. But it's really nice, even for us, to hear that that it's been so meaningful for you guys as well. I know it's been very meaningful for many others. We've heard many people sharing about how impactful your piece has been, so thank you for that. So maybe kind of segueing and moving on from your experience of writing and reading the piece, have you had any interesting encounters? Page Journal has been out for a month now. People have had their copies. Have you had any interesting encounters where other people have read it, friends, families? Yeah, and any funny stories, interesting stories? Oh, you look like you have one. But yeah, I'll let you guys go.
I was going to point out that it was actually a very different experience reading the finished piece when Ryan sent it to us to vet through it, which was in a soft copy, which was when we experienced those emotions that I talked about in the previous question. And then when we read it in the hard copy, it was like so everyone's going to read this. And strangely, it was only when we received that hard copy, which Ryan gave to us, which was when he started distributing to everyone else, right? It's not like the contributors got it early or anything. Did we? No, right?
No.
Yeah, no, we didn't. So yeah, so there was that, and we realized, oh, well, now it's really on paper and it's in multiple copies, and
it's
it's
in the library.
Yes.
And it's
Okay.
the
Funny
library.
story. We were coming to a cell group. We were having dinner over here, and they were talking about that. And I told Amanda, you know, for every book that's published in Singapore, we have to put 2 in the National Library. So that was a bit of a shock for Amanda. I didn't know if she was angry at me or what. But it's there now. But yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, moving on to the question about experience. I mean, so Ryan gave us very kindly a couple of copies to hold on to, and we sort of distributed some of them to our friends, our families. And there's one particular incident that stands out to both of us. We were having some friends over for dinner, and these are friends from my workplace. I mean, yeah, they're a couple of friends from my work, and they both, or all of them, are kind of newly married, almost going to get married couples, kind of. And because, you know, Pace had just been delivered, and I mean, it's such a nice looking book and so ecstatic, right? So we laid it out on our coffee table, and we like pulled out our old like Pace Volume 1 and put it underneath. We're like, oh, looks nice, let's leave it there. And so our friends came over, and they picked, one of them picked it up and looked at the content page and saw that, hey, you guys wrote a piece for this. So we were like, yes, we did. And they read it. It was a bit strange.
They read it
because
aloud.
They read it aloud. And I remember a couple of times we were thinking, wait, do I really sound like? But yeah, we all sat around, and one of them read it aloud. Fortunately, they didn't have 2 of them role play the interview. That would have been even more uncomfortable, but it was uncomfortable enough as it was. And after that conversation, or rather that reading, we had a couple of conversations about what's important, what's important about marriage, what's meaningful about marriage. And these co-workers of mine, they're non-Christians. So it opened up a huge opportunity for us to share why we do what we do and why we held on to the things that we believe in. And I think that was a great conversation that allowed them to see our faith beyond the usual lenses that, you know, sometimes gets portrayed.
Thanks, Riz. Amanda, any thoughts?
I mean, that particular incident, one of the couples, they were, okay, there's only one incident, so I'm just only going to talk about this incident, right? Just to manage your expectations. But so that one couple, they were going through a particular issue at that time. Like there was this one question and they both disagreed. And I think like it was just a lot easier for us to explain certain concepts by drawing it back to like, you know, you just read this, like, you know, so it's like kind of like this, right? And this is why we are saying that if we were in your shoes, we would make these decisions. So I think that really stood out to us as an incident that so you really never know the benefits, or I mean the ways that God will use your experiences and your words to, I don't know, like hopefully help them. We don't know what happened after that. We didn't like check in with them, but hopefully it helped them somewhat. Yeah.
That's nice to hear. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, guys. And thank you for opening up to them as well. It's obviously very uncomfortable. I think if there's any piece that's uncomfortable to have on paper, it's probably your piece. That sounded bad, but you know what I mean, right? Like, it's just, you guys are being very vulnerable, and I thank you for that. And we all thank you for that. Can we give them a round of applause? Thank you. That's not the end of the interview. I just needed to divert attention. But the last question I have, and we'll kind of draw to a close here, is what are some of your reflections on this whole experience of having the conversation, writing it, reading it, speaking with others about it? Do you have maybe one short reflection that you'd like to share with everyone?
Well, it has to be at least 2, right? Because there's 2 of us.
One each.
Well, I think you pointed it out rightly. I mean, it's really this experience of vulnerability and making that vulnerability out there and putting, I mean, we're here, right? Like in front of a couple of, I don't know, tens of you guys. And that has been something that has come up like in a couple of conversations that we've had with those around us about our piece, that the vulnerability was surprising, and it's not something that people were expecting or used to. And I think that in itself, well, I mean, before I would talk about what that vulnerability is, I would say that the reason for that vulnerability for us has been solidified. And I mean, if it was a vague idea of our identity in Christ before, now it's like we got to cling on to it for dear life, you know. But beyond that, I think that opens up the opportunity to show people that, hey, what we as believers trust in and hope in is this different life. It's not radically different, you know. We're not off like doing mission work in some other country. It's just normal, regular living. And even in the simple like living of life, there is such an opportunity for such difference. And it shows. It shows when people look at it and be like, wait a minute, that's different. That's not something I expect. And I think that has been that's been one of our biggest takeaways from this whole experience. Yeah.
Amanda.
So
I stole her line.
yeah, you stole my but
No more differences in their marriage now. After this piece, they're the same person.
I told him not to do it. So the whole theme of this issue was intimacy, right? And I guess for us, it was the idea of how you can still be intimate even as very different people, or even through differences. And I think like what we've reflected on is that this sort of vulnerable way of living is very different, or rather, but still, that sort of different manner of living is how we can create more intimate sort of connections, because our relationships, genuine closeness in that sense. So I think that was another way that I started to think about this, like another play on this theme, right, of intimacy and difference. But yeah, I think generally that people seem very surprised at the piece, which surprised me. I think because how we just blocked it out, you know, how vulnerable it was. And also I think that it's become a part of us, I think, a part of our lives, the way we choose to live. And yeah, so I just thought that reflecting on it, just choosing to live differently is for us the way or rather the way we see how we can build intimate connections and intimate relationships, which is the kind of life and marriage that we want, and the kind of people we want to be, that we do want to, you know, have intimate relationships with friends, with family. Yeah. So I think that was the general reflection I had.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. You know, I realize at this point, there's maybe half of the people in this room who haven't read the piece. So it's all very mysterious. For the other half, I hope you're enjoying it. And well, for the other half, I hope you're enjoying this too. But their piece is really good. And I do encourage everyone to read it if you can. Or later, you can even have a chat with them and ask what these differences we're talking about, what these seasons, what these things have been. And I'm sure they'd be happy to share, kind of force them into it now. Can't unshare.
Or if it's in the book, you read from the book.
Riz is our new salesman. He'll go around. The last question for you guys is actually not really a question for me, but we wanted to open it up to anyone here. I think Riz and Amanda have really been very vulnerable. I think we've said that word a couple of times in showing their lives here. And maybe some of you guys have questions. And if anyone would like to ask a question of Riz and Amanda, feel free to, and I can kind of bring that over. No pressure if you do. I see some hands somewhere, but there's no pressure for those people. Yeah. You can also ask them questions in private upstairs. That's totally fine. Is that my brother with a question? Okay, no questions. Okay, well, that's fine. We thank you, Riz and Amanda, for everything. Can we give them a round of applause?